Okay, here we are in the Substance Painter user interface. Let's import this model. We're going to go up to File, New. We'll get this New Project menu. I'm going to come down here real quick. Since we'll be using this in Blender, I'm going to change this normal map format to OpenGL. Depending on the render engine you're going to be using it in, you may want to leave it as DirectX there. I also want to change the document resolution to 2048. All right. Here's where we go to select our actual model. If we just click here, it'll give us the option to go to our desktop. And then I'm looking for this one here, Axe 3, or wait, no, it's down further. I'm looking for Axe 3A, just like we had before, and we're going to open that. Okay, and once we've selected it, we can just hit OK right here. And there's our axe. Okay, so we've just imported our axe. Now's the time to look for any kind of weird anomalies. Like I said, if you can see through your axe whatsoever, which you shouldn't if you were following along, we recalculated our normals, so there shouldn't be any kind of problems, and this looks pretty darn good. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to learn how to control ourselves while we're in Substance Painter. So it's a little different than Blender. If I hold down the Alt key and my left click, I can orbit around. If I hold down the Alt key and my middle mouse button, I can grab. And of course, scroll wheel scrolls in and out. Okay, that's the basics for that. We'll get into controlling brushes here in just a minute when we use them. Before we can do anything within Substance Painter for this project, we have to allow Substance Painter to bake a set of mesh maps that it's going to use for this particular object in order to make sure that the textures go onto this axe properly. So the way we do that is we come right over here where it says Texture Set Settings, left click, and then we want to come down to the one right here that says Bake Mesh Maps. You may have to use your little slider here. Where it says Mesh Maps, we want to hit this one that says Bake Mesh Maps. When we do that, we'll get this baking menu. I'm going to change the output size to 2048. You can pick whatever you want. Generally, I like to work at 2048 and then up it to 4096 as we export the textures at the end. That gives our processor a little bit of a break. Okay, the next thing we want to do is come down here where it says Use Low Poly Mesh as High Poly Mesh. Let's put a check in that box. And then these are the maps that it's going to create for us. We want to make sure that we have ID map set up. Sorry about that. We want to make sure that we have ID map set up right here. And that's going to pick up that ID map we made in the vertex painting section of Blender. And it's part of the FBX file. And so we want to make sure that that's there. The rest of these are going to stay checked as well. Once we do that, we can come down here where it says Bake 1001 Mesh Maps. Now, again, I'm terrible at naming this stuff. There's a proper way to name it in Blender, but it really doesn't matter. We'll name it at the end. So just go ahead and click right here, Bake those mesh maps. And we'll see that Substance Painter is going to bake a normal map, world space, ID, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness map. And remember, these are the maps that Substance Painter needs to do its business. So let's just hit OK. All right, so we're ready to rock now. We've got our mesh maps baked. We're ready to start putting stuff together here. I'm going to come right up here to the top and click this one that says Layers so we can see our layer stack. Now the way this works is whatever layer I have selected, it'll be in blue as I select it, or the components in that layer. If I come right down here, I'll have the properties for whatever I have selected in that layer. Right now this is just a standard paint layer. I'm going to get rid of that by right clicking and then come down here where it says Remove Layers. Okay, before we get going in this here as well, I'm going to turn up the background. Right now we have an HDRI lighting the scene, but its parameters are, the opacity is down. So if we come right over here to this window here, click it, we can come right here where it says Environment Opacity, and let's kick that all the way up. Okay, now we can see it's showing the environment map, but it's blurred out. So if we want to, we can come over here for the environment blur, and we can just kick that all the way down. I think this looks a little neater for this project, so I'm gonna go with that. Now, if we at any time, I'm gonna close this window. At any time, if we want to, we can change this environment by coming down in here to our shelf. This area down here is called the shelf. If we come down to the bottom, we can actually pick environments. And then all I have to do is grab it by left clicking and drag it in up here, and it'll change the look of our environment. And just to review, if we hold Alt and left click down, we can orbit around and see what we got going on. So this is a cool space environment, which is kind of neat. I'm going to go with probably this one right here. I think this looks pretty good. This is something we can use for a Viking axe. So I'm going to go with this one for our background. All right, cool. So now we can see our background. Again, if you don't like that, you can just go here and change the settings. So I'm going to leave this open though. And then you can just drag and drop all these environments. There's also some studio lighting and some other stuff, which is pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to go up here and we're going to find the one that says materials in our shelf list selections here. So materials, that'll give us this bottom area that has the base materials that are in Substance Painter. Right now we don't have a layer, so we don't have any properties. I'm going to go down to the bottom one here that says Steel Rust A. If you hover over them, you'll get this thumbnail. I'm going to left click and hold the left click down and drag this up into our layer stack and just drop it. Now we see the entire axe has that color. We're not worried about the handle right now. We're just going to work on the material for the metal. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so we can see what's going on and get this kind of from the side. And something like that looks pretty good. All right, cool. So we're ready to start doing some stuff to this material. With this layer selected, we now have the properties for that material. If we come down further, we can see we can scale the UV, the texture space on the UV. We can rotate it, offset it. We're just going to leave it standard. We can see right now it's creating a color, height, roughness, and metallic maps for us. It's not creating a normal for this one. This is the material. Attributes would be the description of what's going on here. You don't really need to know about that. Metal color, we can change the color, darker or lighter. Metal roughness, if we want to make this a real dull metal, we can just change that. Or if we want it to be really shiny, you can see how shiny that is. So we don't want it to be that shiny. I want to take this roughness up somewhere, I don't know, about 0.268 is what I have it. I want it to be a little bit metallic, a little bit shiny, but not too much. Okay. And then we can come down a little further and we can see if we kick up the surface imperfections, you can see we start to get a lot of divots, which is kind of neat. I'm going to kick up the surface imperfections, kick it back down to say 0.45, something like that. We want a little bit, but not a lot. Dirt intensity, I'm going to leave all of these the same. The dirt intensity, contrast, and scale, they're all related. I'm going to leave them just where they are because at the end we're going to add a dirt layer, so I'm not really worried about that in this material. Last but not least, we can kick up the rust. If we really wanted this to be a really rusty axe, we could really just rust it out. And that might be a cool texture set for, you know, if you're making a game with a dungeon it's just an old axe that's kind of laying there on the floor, it might be rusty. So that's might be what you want. I'm going to bring this back down and have a little bit of rust in there, but not much. So I'm at 0.14. Okay, cool. That's good for this material. Now what we want to do is we want to hold the Alt key and left click, and we want to get a straight on view of this axe from the side. And if we come up here to the top here, we can check our views. It's this one right here. I'm going to click it and go into orthographic view. And once we do that, you can see that we start to be able to see the top of the axe here and maybe the bottom a little bit. So let's adjust it a little bit more so we're looking straight on to our axe, meaning I can't see any of the top of the axe and I can't see any of the bottom of the axe. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to add a cool design using an alpha. So if I come up to the material that we're working on here, with it selected, you can just left click, make sure it's blue. Now we can right click and we can add in a paint layer. So I'm going to come down to this one down here that says paint layer and click it. And now our layer is getting more complex. We have multiple components on the same layer. So these are all still the same part of the same layer. Okay, so we can click on this paint layer and then we can see its properties down below. We can see that it has a regular brush and that the color is white. If we come down a little further, I'm going to keep coming down here till we get to where it says material. What we're going to do here is we're going to only paint with a height information. So let's left click the rest of these to make sure that they're turned off. So we only have a height channel now. And right down here under our controls, we can see that we have a slider. If we slide it all the way to the left over here, we'll be digging into our object. And if we turn it all the way to the right over here, we'll be making bump information that looks like it's coming out. I want this to be slightly below. I don't want it to be too deep, but below the midline to the left is going to give us information that goes down below. All right, now let's pick an alpha to use as our stamp. If we come over here to our shelves picker here, our list picker, we can go right here to the one that says alphas. Let's click it, and then we'll see we get a bunch of these black and white images. Now you can create your own black and white images. I mean, they're just basically simple black and white images. They're square, so they're 2048 or 4096 or 1024 by 1024. But you can make these really easy. I've made quite a few, so it's kind of fun. All right, so I'm going to come down here a little bit, and we're going to pick this one right here, Celtic Round. Let's just left click it. And now we'll see that my brush is that alpha. Okay, and so we only have height data being created here. We've turned everything else off. And we're slightly below the center line, which means what we do here is going to dig into our metal and make it appear as if it's going into the metal. Okay, so let's talk about brush control here. If I hold down the control key and then scroll wheel, you can see that it gets bigger or smaller. I want to go one more click, no, probably about like that. Now I'm going to use my mouse to center this up. I'm going to use the points on the center to line up with the handle and everything else. And when I get it good, looking good, I'm just going to simply left click. And check that out. We got an actual stamp here that's stamped into our metal. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to turn our axe around, try to get a good view of it, like we did before, using the perspective view to make sure that we're straight on as possible. And it really doesn't matter if you're a little off even. And then we can just come right here like this, line it up again in the center, and then left click, and we just stamped it. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna come up here and turn off this perspective view. Which one was it? I think it's this one. Yeah, let's go back into perspective view. Okay, cool, that looks pretty fair. We've got our stamp going. I'm just gonna click the regular material here, and that'll get rid of our stamp. Okay, the next thing we wanna do is we wanna add some metal edge wear, and we wanna add the parts that look like it's been sharpened. So those parts will be a lighter color with some more textures on them. So let's get to it. So the next thing I'm gonna add is we have to come down to our shelf, over here to our shelf selection area, and I'm going to pick materials again, and then we're going to come down to the bottom. We're going to pick the same material we picked before, Steel Rust A. Now, I want to just, if I click this, it's going to assume that I want to change the parameters that we already created for this. So if I simply click it, I'm going to mess this part up just a little bit. So all I want to do is I want to left click and hold, and then I want to drag this up here until I see a white line above this other one, and that'll let me drop it above. And you can see it doesn't really look like much happened. Okay, so now with that layer selected, we can come down into its properties. I'm going to come down to the one that says metal color. Let's left click it. And then let's make the color quite a bit lighter. We want a pretty decent amount of contrast here. I found that if you don't have very much contrast, when we take it back into Blender, we're going to not be able to see the contrast as much as I'd like. So once we pick a color in the color picker, we can come over here and just click off in the border, and that'll get rid of it. Okay, cool. Everything else for now, we're going to leave surface imperfections, all this other stuff, just how it is by default. Okay, cool. Now what we need to do is we need to say, we want the dark material here, and we want the light material on the edges where we want it. So with the lighter material selected, it's blue, we can right click, and then we can add a white mask. Once we add a white mask, now we see our layers getting more complex. We have two components. We want to make sure that this Steel Rust and Wear is selected, and then we want to right click, and we want to add a generator. So we'll just come down here and pick Add Generator. Now, we have a third component to this layer now, this generator, and it says it's empty. If we come right down here into its properties, generator, no generator selected. If we simply left click here, it'll allow us to pick a generator. The one we want is this one called Metal Edge Wear. So let's click it. Once we do, we see that we have some metal edge wear. There's a little bit along the edges here. For me, the way we modeled this by using smoothing, we didn't bevel any edges, anything like that. It's never really going to come out that great. I think Substance Painter likes a little more geometry to be able to do this kind of stuff. Anyways, but we're just going to come back in and paint where we want it. Okay, so the way we do that is we come up to this layer and we click on the mask. So not the color, not the edge wear. This one here, if we click it, then we can right click and we can come down and add a paint layer. So let's add a paint layer. There's the paint layer now. If we can click it, make sure it's selected, it's blue, we can come down to its properties. We can see right now that it's allowing us, it's using the standard brush, and it's in the color black. Now the way this is going to work is, if we paint in black, it's going to bring back this lower color, this darker color. Let's slide the slider all the way over to white, and then that will allow us to bring out this lighter color here. Before we do that, I don't want to paint with this brush because it doesn't really look very good. So let's come down to our shelf selections here, and let's pick brushes. And the one I want is this one called Dirt 1. So I'm going to left click it. And as I bring my brush up, you can see that now my brush texture is different. So again, to control our paintbrush using our mouse and buttons here, we can hold down the control key and scroll wheel, and our brush will get a little bit smaller. Now, if I want to rotate the brush, I'm going to hold down the control key. I also am going to hold down my left click, and then I'm going to move my mouse forwards and backwards, and we can see that it rotates it. Now, if I hold down the control key, hold down my left click, and move my mouse to the left and to the right, we'll see that my flow of my brush can be maximized or minimized. Okay, now I can also change the size of my brush right up here if that's easier for you. You can also change the flow right here. The flow basically just says how powerful this effect is going to be. All right, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key and my left click and get a little better view of our axe here. Okay, cool. So now what we're going to do is we're painting in white, have this cool new brush going on here. And then now all we're going to do is I'm just going to paint the edges out. And we can see as I paint, I'm just holding down my mouse button and running it across here. We want to bring this in just a little bit so that it looks like this is the sharpened edge. So it's going to be a different color than the rest of the axe. Okay, and then I'm going to hold Alt and left click down and get the back end of the axe now. So yeah, we want to go and just kind of rub out an area here like this. Okay, so I think that looks pretty fair. Let's do the other side real quick. So again, I have to hold down the Alt key, left click, and just turn my axe around. And you'll see that we get the other side. So just try to kind of match it up. You don't want it to go too much further than the other side did. Otherwise, it'll look a little weird. And so I'm just holding down my left click to paint this on here. Okay, and sometimes it might move a little slow, depending on your processor. And I've got a Camtasia screen capture going, so it's a little bit slow, but that's okay. All right, cool. So now we have those ends all done. Let's put in some more edge wear along the rest of the axe. So Alt left click to get a better view, and then Alt middle mouse to grab. And then I want to zoom in kind of here on the top. And then I'm going to make the brush smaller by hitting Control left click. Oh, I'm sorry, Control scroll wheel. And then I'm just going to kind of rub it along the edge here. And I'm not going to take too much time. You might want to take more time. Again, I find painting in Substance Painter to be very soothing. So if you're throw on some music and really just take your time, it's really kind of a good way to spend some time, especially in the stressful environment we're all in right now. This is really kind of a good way to take your mind off some stuff. Okay, and then so you'll take more time than I will. Oh, Control Z, I accidentally swiped across it, which will happen. And then I'm just going to use my Alt and left click to maneuver around. And then let's just give it a little bit of edge wear. I don't really care too much because I'm not really going to take too much time here. I'm going to Control scroll wheel, make it a little smaller. And just kind of rub it wherever you like. And remember, you can Control left click, hold left click down, and move your mouse forwards and backwards and rotate. So yeah, that's what you'll want to do a lot, is rotate it around so you don't get the same pattern repeating over and over again. Okay, cool. That's about as far as I'm going to go. Oh, Control Z, I didn't want to do that. So Alt, and then, so that's looking pretty good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, since we have this paint layer out, is we're going to change the brush. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to see it. I believe it's Scratches number 5 is what I'm looking for. It's right over here. Just click it. Now we have this brush. Okay, and then I'm going to turn the flow down quite a bit. And then now what we can do is we want to line these scratches up by hitting Control, holding down Control, hold down our left click, and then move our mouse forwards or backwards. And we want to kind of line these up with the axe. And all we're going to do is come back in here just a little bit, and we're just going to add some paint scratches. This will make our axe look a little more interesting. If you want them to be more pronounced, then turn the flow up. So again, you can hold down left click, and then move your mouse left and right, and you can bring the flow up. And if you do that, you'll see that you can get the scratches to show up a little better. I want the scratches to be kind of subtle. And of course, they won't show up in this other part here. We're only doing them on the edge here, so you can see a little bit of scratches. All right, Alt and left click to rotate around. And we're going to do some more over here. So Control, left click, move our mouse forwards and backwards allows us to rotate it so we stay in alignment with the axe. Something like that. And just get a little bit of some scratches in there. Okay, so Alt, left click to bring this around. Alt, middle mouse to drag this out here where we can see it better. And then again, Control, left click, move our mouse forwards and backwards. Keep it in alignment with the axe if you can as you go down this. You can see and it's okay to cross some of these up. When somebody's sharpening an axe, they may not have it perfect all the time. And if we get too much of a something there, we can just kind of cross some up. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's do the same over here. Make sure we got some scratches here. Okay, cool. All right, and so the next part that we're going to do is we're going to add actually some more height data using this same brush by coming over to our layer stack. And we're going to pick this bottom layer. We're going to pick its paint layer. And remember, we're only painting height data here. So as I come out here like this, I'm going to have to come into my brushes again and select scratches number 5. And again, we're painting in, so this is going to divot in. Control left click, move my mouse forwards or backwards. And then I'm going to Control left click and move my mouse left and right to change my flow down a little bit because I don't want this to be too powerful. And then Control left click to line up my scratches. And then I'm just going to start putting some scratches on here. And I'll change the view here in a second for the lighting so you can see it. The lighting I have isn't really that great right now. So I'm going to Alt left click, and now we can see that we actually have some real height data that's being generated. So Control left click and rotate, and we can just add some more scratches in here. We don't want to go crazy with this, and you don't want it to be too powerful with your flow. And you can cross these up. Most of the time people are pretty good about sharpening straight on, but there would be some kind of cross hatching going on. Okay, cool. So that looks pretty good. Let's do the back over here. And we can just kind of remember to rotate it. Control left click and moving your mouse forward. All right, cool. Let's rotate around to the other side. Hold down the Alt key, left click, and move this around just so we get a little bit more stuff going on here. All right, and then let's add some scratches over here. My flow, I'm going to Control left click and move left to right. Move my flow up just a little bit. And then Control left click, move my mouse forwards and backwards for rotating. It'll take a little bit. If you're new to it, it's going to take a little bit because it's really just not like Blender does it. But it's pretty cool. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty awesome. And again, this is a really good way to get lost for a little while. Take your mind off the troubles of the world. Hopefully everything's going well where you are for you and yours. I know it's kind of hard times right now. Okay, cool. Let's get the back here. I find that if I throw myself into some work and try to take my mind off of it, things go a little better. Okay, cool. So we have a bunch of scratches on here. It's looking pretty good. We could see them all in the light. It's looking pretty good. Okay, cool. Okay, so we're done putting the scratches and stuff on there. I think we're just going to move on. You could spend a lot of time doing that. If you think these need to be more powerful, again, just kick the flow up and add some more. For me, I like them to be a little more subtle. In some of my practices, I had it on there just a little too much and it looked a little bit rough. So that's why I'm going subtle, but you can go however you like. And you can see the scratches on there. Let's turn it around this way. Anyways, you can see the scratches on there, and they look pretty good. It's good to keep them subtle, and you might want to, you know, if you see some places where there isn't enough, you can come back in and just kind of add some if you think it needs more. So take your time, enjoy the painting process. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to move this out to the center here. All right, cool. Okay, so the next layer we're going to do is we're going to add the wood material for the handle. And the way we do that is we simply come down to our shelf, we go to materials, and then I'm going to come down to the bottom here, and I'm just going to use this one wood walnut. Now again, you don't want to click this right now because it's going to then give it to everything. We want to hover over the wood walnut, left click and hold, and then we want to drag this all the way up to the top till we see this white line letting us know we could drop it above the other layers. Okay, now it covers our entire axe and makes it look like kind of funny. But we want to create a mask here using that ID map that we created in Blender so that the wood's only where we want it to be. So with this layer selected, we can right click, and then we can come down to the one right here that says Add Mask with Color Selection. So let's go ahead and click that. We come down to this properties for the color selection, and we can come right out here to where it says pick color. I'm going to left click that. We see we get our ID map that we created in Blender, so that's kind of cool. And all I want to do is use this color picker to pick the color red. Now you see that we have the wood applied to the handle, which is pretty cool. Now, one thing you may notice right off the bat is the wood grain is going the wrong direction. So that's easy to fix. If we come right back up here into this layer, click on the actual wood color, the wood material, come down to its properties, and then we're going to find the one down here where it says UV transformations. We're going to go to the one that says rotate, and we're just going to left click and hold and move it till it looks right. So just keep going till it looks I like it to be straight up and down, pretty much. Something like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to zoom in just a little more. So that's what our wood looks like so far. Let's come down and mess with it a little more. If we come down into its materials down here, we can change the color. For me, the color looks pretty good, but you can change it here, no problem. Make it lighter, darker, or whatever color you want. If we want this to be really shiny, we can kick up the roughness, making it look like it has some kind of lacquer finish. I don't think that looks very good, so I'm going to go back somewhere kind of in the middle-ish. Say 0.46 is what I have it at. And then the last control we have here is called the ring steps, and this basically just changes the size of the grains. So you pick it whatever you think would look good. I think something like around 9 looks pretty fair. Okay, so cool. We have our whole axe now is looking pretty decent. So one more thing that I want to add before we're done here, and again, take your time on this. I'm kind of speeding through this. Take your time. You can really make this look cool. The last thing that I want to add is a dirt layer over the entire thing. So this axe is well used, so it's going to have a little bit of grime on it. So the way we do that is we come right up here to where it says base color, and we have all these options across the top. Up until now, we've been adding layers, extra paint layers and stuff by right-clicking in these layers. This time we want to come all the way to the top. I'm going to come to this one right here, and it's called Add a Fill Layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and left-click, and it's going to add a fill layer. Now the fill layer should be on the very top. If it popped in down below, simply left-click on it, hold the left-click, and drag it up to the top till you see the white line, and then let it go. It has to be on top of every other layer. Okay, so with that selected, we can come down to its properties here. I'm going to change its base color by coming into the color picker. Right here we have hue, saturation, and value. I'm going to go to the hue one, left click, and drag it up till it kind of turns a little bit brownish, something like that. Then we can grab this plus sign, this color picker thing, and bring it down into the darker color a little bit, somewhere in here. You pick. We're just looking for a kind of a dirt grime color. Once you have it, you have to left click off to get rid of the color picker. Okay, now dust is not shiny at all, so we're going to come down to its roughness, and we're going to move it pretty far down over here. I'm at like 0.7 or so. And we'll see we have this dull color all over the entire object. Now, again, we want to use a mask to say we want dirt in some places but not in others. So if we come to this fill layer with it selected, right click, we're going to add a white mask. So go ahead and click the white mask. Now that didn't do anything. We didn't see any changes whatsoever. So now if we right click the white mask, we can come down to add generator. Let's add a generator. We can see that we have a new slot in that layer. And then let's come down to its properties and pick our generator. So no generator selected, let's left click. And then the one we're going to pick is dirt. Okay, so basically it masked it out based on our mesh maps that Substance Painter painted for us or created at the beginning for us. And it now is going to apply dirt onto our model. Let me get a little bit closer here and we can see, in particular right here, you can see the dirt that it created. It's actually created it all over our axe, but if we have that dirt generator selected, we can come down to its properties and we can change the dirt level. So if we don't want as much dirt, you can see that we can just change the amount of dirt. I don't want a huge amount of dirt. Maybe 0.58 is what I have it at. If we want that contrast of the dirt between that and the other metal to be greater, we can just kick up the contrast, and that'll start to make it look like, if I kick the dirt level up too, you'll see it starts to make it look like caked on grime and grease. Now, if that's what you want, then obviously go with that. I'm going to turn the contrast back down quite a bit, and then turn the dirt layer level down just a little bit. Okay, everything else looks pretty good for me. You could also come to this one right here. It says grunge amount and kick it up, and it'll really grunge it up for you. Let me get a better view here. It'll really add a lot of grunge to your axe. I don't think that looks as good, so I'm going to turn that back down quite a bit. So maybe 0.3. Okay, cool. So we've got our axe pretty much done here. We're ready to export our materials. So once we do that, you're going to want to have a place for you to export these materials. I would suggest creating a folder on your desktop. And then once you're ready, all you do is come up here to File, and then go to Export Textures. And then you're going to pick a place for those to go. I like to change it to 4096. Now you'll have to pay attention to what render engine. If you're using a video game engine, it may only want you to use 2048. If you're looking for the best detail quality you can, though, click it here and you can go to 4096. So 4096, pick a place for it to go, a folder. Usually I put it on my desktop. And then once you have a place for it to go and you've set its resolution, then just go down here and hit export. Okay, and I think I told you that I'm not going to be covering how to put this back on the materials in Blender. You can just look at my last tutorial on creating an industrial bar stool. Watch the last video. The technique's exactly the same, so I don't feel I should have to cover that again. That'll just waste everybody's time. And it might give me an extra view if you check that out. So, okay, thanks for joining me for this tutorial series. I'll see you in the next one.